The year 2005 brought a series of shocking events to the people of Mexico. In October and December, black suitcases containing human remains were discovered in public places. On the 23rd of January, 2006, a 25-year-old man named Raul Osiel Marroquin Reyes was arrested in Mexico City and later presented to the media as the person responsible. He was a thin man with an intense and intimidating stare. At the time, he told reporters that he did not regret his actions. On the contrary, he claimed that he had performed a service for society and described his methods with frightening calmness. Raul Osiel Marroquin Reyes was born on the 1st of September 1980 in Tampico, Tamaulipas. His father was reportedly strict and authoritarian and frequently mistreated him. According to accounts about his childhood, his father held deeply hostile views toward homosexual people and passed those attitudes on to his son. Raul grew up believing that such people were harmful to society. As a young man, he entered the Mexican army. He studied military medicine for approximately 1 year and served in the armed forces for about 4 years, eventually reaching the rank of sergeant. After leaving the army, he had already changed considerably. He developed a pronounced cruelty and suffered from severe fits of rage. After his military service, he searched for work in several places. Because he had been discharged from the army under unfavorable circumstances, however, he experienced serious difficulty finding employment. After failing to establish a stable life, he turned to robbery and violence. In 2004, he was arrested and spent approximately 14 months in prison for violent robbery. Following his release, he left Tampico and moved to Mexico City. He lived in an apartment at number 4223 on Avenida Andrés Molina Enriquez in the Asturias neighborhood. In Mexico City, he frequently visited Zona Rosa, an entertainment district filled with bars, clubs, cafes, restaurants, and nightlife venues. The area was popular among gay men, some of whom approached Raul and invited him to socialize. One day, a disturbing plan formed in his mind. Driven by anger, resentment, and a desire for money, he decided to commit an even more serious crime. He did not act alone. He was assisted by a friend named Juan Enrique Madrid Manuel. Together, they decided to kidnap people and demand money from their families. On the night of the 21st of October, 2005, the two men entered a nightclub and agreed to separate while searching for a suitable victim. Madrid Manuel met a man named Juan Carlos Alfaro Alba. He approached him, asked whether he was alone, and began a conversation. Madrid Manuel asked where Juan Carlos worked, where he came from, and how old he was. Juan Carlos said that he was from Michoacán and had arrived in Mexico City only 15 days earlier. Madrid Manuel briefly left him and went to speak with Raul. After discussing the situation, they decided that Juan Carlos would be taken to the Hotel Amazonas. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, Madrid Manuel and Juan Carlos left the club. Madrid Manuel invited him to the hotel, and Juan Carlos agreed. They entered rooms 619. Madrid Manuel went into the bathroom, and when he returned, he kissed Juan Carlos and secretly placed a tablet in his mouth. Juan Carlos initially believed that it was a mint and swallowed it. Within minutes, he lost consciousness. When he awoke, he had a rope around his neck. Madrid Manuel told him that they were on the 6th floor and threatened to throw him through the window. The kidnappers forced him to reveal personal information about his relatives so that they could demand a ransom. Juan Carlos was wrapped in a blanket and restrained with plastic ties. He remained imprisoned in the room for approximately 1 week. One day, he realized that he had been left alone. He managed to stand, reached the door, and called for help. Hotel employees discovered him and released him from his restraints. Juan Carlos contacted his family and described what had happened. He asked his brother to bring him clothing because he had been abandoned without money or personal belongings. The family later listened to recorded messages left by Raul and his accomplice. In the recordings, the kidnappers demanded 3,000 pesos for Juan Carlos's release. His mother explained that the family was experiencing financial difficulties and could not afford the requested amount. After this failed attempt, the kidnappers concluded that using hotels was too dangerous because employees could identify them. They decided to use Raul's apartment as the location for future crimes. They carefully planned their method so that they would not fail again. Raul would visit clubs in Zona Rosa, gain the trust of potential victims, and invite them to his apartment, where Madrid Manuel would be waiting. They also purchased a heavy wrought iron hook and attached it high on a living room wall. The hook would later become part of their method. 6 days later, on the 27th of October, everything was ready. On Thursday evening, Raul entered the Cabaretito Neon nightclub. After observing the customers, he approached a young man named Jonathan Razo Ayala. He selected Jonathan because he believed that the young man would be easy to overpower. Jonathan had planned to meet a friend and enter the club with him. His friend was late, however, so Jonathan decided to go inside alone. After speaking with Raul for approximately 1 hour, Jonathan accepted an invitation to visit his apartment. Before leaving, Jonathan briefly met the friend who had arrived late. The friend warned him not to go with Raul. Jonathan ignored the warning and decided to accompany him. As soon as they entered the apartment, Raul seized Jonathan. Madrid Manuel came out of another room and grabbed his arms and legs. He told Jonathan that everything would be fine and ordered him to remain calm. They carried him into another room and tied him to a bed with ropes. They questioned him about his income, property, and the financial condition of his family. They also demanded personal information about his relatives. The kidnappers decided to demand 50,000 pesos. That same night, they contacted Jonathan's parents and ordered them to transfer 4,000 pesos into their son's account. They warned his father not to tell anyone and not to contact the police. During the following days, Raul repeatedly forced Jonathan's parents to deposit additional money. Jonathan was occasionally allowed to speak with his father by telephone. On the 12th of November, after approximately 16 days in captivity, Jonathan was taken out of the room under the false promise that he was about to be released. His eyes were covered with adhesive tape, supposedly so that he would not recognize where he was being taken. The kidnappers placed a noose around his neck and attached it to the metal hook. After several minutes, Jonathan showed no signs of life. That night, his body was wrapped in plastic, forced into a tightly folded position, and placed inside a suitcase that the kidnappers had previously purchased. At approximately 8 o'clock the following morning, Raul and Madrid Manuel considered how they could remove the suitcase from the building without attracting attention. They carried it outside, while one of them wore a backpack to create the impression that they were travelers. They called a taxi and traveled approximately 15 blocks before changing vehicles in an attempt to confuse anyone who might be following them. They eventually reached the area around the Chabacano metro station. Jonathan's body was abandoned near the station, and the kidnappers escaped. The body was discovered later, but investigators initially found no evidence that immediately identified the killers. To avoid arrest, the accomplices began studying reports about crimes committed by extremist groups. They hoped to learn how to destroy evidence and mislead investigators. On Wednesday, the 30th of November 2005, Raul returned to the same nightclub in Zona Rosa. In the restroom, he met a 31-year-old man who gave him a television station business card. The man was Ricardo Lopez Hernandez, who had visited the club with a friend. Raul spoke with Ricardo for some time and eventually invited him to his apartment. They left the club and took a taxi. Madrid Manuel was already waiting inside the apartment. Raul subdued Ricardo in the same manner used against Jonathan. Madrid Manuel joined him and tied Ricardo's hands and feet. They ordered him to remain calm and demanded information about his family. The kidnappers contacted Ricardo's relatives and initially demanded 8,000 pesos. They later ordered Ricardo to call his family from his own telephone and tell them that he was alive and that they should follow every instruction. During the telephone call, the kidnappers demanded another 4,000 pesos and explained that this was only a small portion of the total ransom. They said that if the family wanted to see Ricardo alive again, they would have to pay 120,000 pesos. Ricardo begged his relatives to use the family home as security if they could not obtain the full amount immediately. Despite the threats, the family contacted the police. Officers visited their home and explained how they should respond to the kidnappers. Between Saturday, the 3rd of December, and Thursday, the 8th of December, Ricardo's relatives received more than 20 telephone calls. Raul visited a bank and used Ricardo's identity to open 3 accounts without immediately attracting suspicion. Raul and Madrid Manuel then called the family again and asked how much money they had collected. Ricardo's father replied that they had managed to raise only 28,000 pesos. Raul provided the information for the 3 bank accounts and ordered him to deposit the money. The kidnappers promised that Ricardo would be released as soon as they withdrew it. On Friday, the 9th of December, Ricardo's family followed the instructions in the hope that he would be freed. After transferring the money, they informed Raul and waited for their son to return. By that time, however, Raul and Madrid Manuel had already decided not to keep their promise. They blindfolded Ricardo, placed a noose around his neck, and killed him using the same method they had used against Jonathan. Raul then added a deliberate piece of staging. Using a knife, he carved a pentagram into Ricardo's forehead in an attempt to make the killing appear connected to a ritual or extremist group. The kidnappers bound Ricardo's legs, arms, and head with white plastic cord, forcing his body into a tightly folded position. They wrapped him in black plastic bags and placed him inside a black suitcase. They took a taxi toward the Chabacano metro station and later changed vehicles. They continued to Avenida Miramontes, where they abandoned the suitcase. At approximately 8:57 that evening, a woman noticed the suitcase. Because it was unusually heavy, she contacted the police. Ricardo's body was discovered shortly afterward. Investigators reviewed movements connected to the bank accounts, but the inquiry initially produced no decisive result. On the 23rd of December, Ricardo's father read a newspaper report about a body found inside a suitcase. A forensic examination later confirmed that the victim was his son. On the 13th of December 2005, Raul kidnapped another man, Jose Ricardo Galindo Valdez. Raul contacted the victim's mother. She begged him not to harm her son and explained that she had no money for a ransom. For reasons that remain uncertain, Raul eventually released Jose Ricardo after threatening him and warning him to remain silent. On Friday, the 16th of December, Raul returned to the Cabritito Neon nightclub in search of more victims. By this time, he had become experienced at approaching thin men and gaining their trust. This time, he selected 2 men within a short period. He first spoke with Armando Rivas Perez, who was accompanied by friends. Their conversation was brief, but Raul obtained Armando's telephone number and arranged to meet him later for a meal. Raul then approached Victor Ángel Iván Gutiérrez Balderas. He spoke with him for a longer period and gradually gained his confidence. Raul pretended to have a romantic interest in him and invited him to spend the night at his apartment. Madrid Manuel was already waiting there. When Victor entered the apartment, the 2 men overpowered him, tied his hands and feet, and restricted his movement. They demanded the contact details of his relatives. They called Victor's family and demanded 15,000 pesos for his release. The family transferred money and reported the kidnapping to the police. Raul later met Armando near the La Viga metro station. They ate together, after which Raul invited him to the apartment. Once inside, Raul and Madrid Manuel overpowered Armando and took him into a room where Victor was already being held. The kidnappers telephoned Armando's parents. At first, the family believed that the call was a cruel joke and demanded to speak with their son. Several minutes later, the kidnappers called again, and Armando personally confirmed that he was being held against his will. He was returned to the room with Victor. His hands and feet were restrained, and his mouth was covered to prevent him from shouting or resisting. On Monday, the 19th of December, at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, Raul contacted Armando's Tong's family and provided detailed instructions for depositing 15,000 pesos. He promised that Armando would be released later that day. Armando's father, Roberto Rivas Gonzalez, went to a bank and transferred the demanded money into 2 accounts. He received no further information about his son. On the 20th of December, the kidnappers contacted Victor's parents and said that he would be released if another 15,000 pesos was paid. Victor's father followed their instructions the next day, but waited in vain for a telephone call. On Thursday, the 22nd of December, Raul and Madrid Manuel decided not to leave either captive alive. Armando was killed first, followed by Victor. Both victims were restrained and strangled in a manner similar to the previous murders. The bodies were placed inside separate suitcases. The kidnappers intended to transport them away in 2 taxis, but the suitcases were too heavy. They dragged them approximately 100 meters from the apartment building and abandoned them near a flower bed before returning to the residence. At approximately 8 o'clock that evening, the building's concierge reported the suitcases to the police. Officers secured the area and began collecting evidence. They followed marks left by the suitcase wheels on the pavement The tracks led back toward the apartment building at number 4223. At first, the officers did not enter the building and instead questioned neighbors. Several days later, they obtained a search warrant and continued following the evidence to apartment number 2. When no one answered the door, the police forced their way inside. They discovered clear evidence that the victims had been held there. The investigators found documents connected to Juan Enrique Madrid Manuel, including records relating to his previous imprisonment and his service in the Mexican army. They also found work gloves, personal documents belonging to Ricardo Lopez Hernandez and Jonathan Razo Ayala, and bank cards obtained using the victims' identities. 3 photographs were also recovered, including a photograph of Raul with a former partner. Investigators found equipment suggesting that one of the suspects had worked in emergency medical services. They also recovered the knife believed to have been used to carve the pentagram into Ricardo's forehead. The principal suspects were no longer inside the apartment. Investigators began searching for both men and placed Raul's known locations under surveillance. On the 23rd of January, 2006, federal agents arrested Raul Osiel Marroquin Reyes in Mexico City. He was taken into custody without a violent struggle. During questioning, he admitted that he understood why he had been arrested. He also stated that he had considered additional victims and had intended to continue committing kidnappings and murders. The media later referred to him as El Sádico, meaning the sadist, and El Asesino del Arco Iris, meaning the rainbow killer. In statements made after his arrest, he repeatedly claimed that he felt no remorse. He attempted to justify the murders by saying that he had performed a service for society and by making hateful statements about gay men. He also claimed that one victim had been living with a serious illness and that killing him had prevented the disease from spreading. During court proceedings, he appeared cold and emotionally detached. His stare was repeatedly described as intimidating. In October of 2006, he received a sentence of 60 years for the kidnapping and murder of Ricardo Lopez Hernandez. In May of 2007, another sentence of 147 years was imposed for crimes against Jonathan Razo Ayala and Armando Rivas Perez. Additional judgments eventually brought his cumulative sentence to approximately 288 years for 6 kidnappings and 4 murders. He was later transferred to the Santa Marta Acatitla Penitentiary in Mexico City. His accomplice, Juan Enrique Madrid Manuel, was also convicted and received lengthy prison sentences for his participation in the crimes. Raul Osiel Marroquin Reyes was responsible for one of the most disturbing series of kidnappings and murders committed against gay men in Mexico City during the early years of the 21st century. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe.